Welcome to ARK for Dummies, and today's topic is gene traits. It's a brand new thing that was just added to the game, and you're going to learn everything that you need to know about it in this comprehensive guide, because I've done a deep dive into the genes. I found all the spare change in the pocket lint, and I know exactly everything that you need to know about this topic, and you're going to learn everything in this video, of course. So guys, one thing I do want to mention is there's going to be timestamps down below if you want to know specific things, and feel free to skip around if you want to. But also, if you do enjoy the video, drop a like, maybe even a comment. It helps out the algorithm, and I guess you can also share the video and subscribe. It's up to you. Anyway, let's get into it. So you may be wondering, what are traits and why are they important? Well, traits are essentially new buffs added to creatures that heavily affect the gameplay, honestly. There's a lot of different types, which we'll be going over later on in the video. But yeah, they're essentially this brand new mechanic that is here to stay and that you should probably learn about. So there's one thing you're going to need to do, and that is buy Bob's Tall Tales, because it brings in this brand new item called the Gene Scanner, which is available at level 86 for all those shiny resources right there. And once you have this, you're going to be able to go around to wild creatures and see exactly what gene traits they actually have. You can do this by holding down right click, and it's going to go ahead and show you from a pretty significant distance actually what gene traits they actually have. You could even use this as your new spyglass, because you can see what level it is from a pretty good distance. I mean, I'm fairly far away from that spy now. Now, once you see that gene trait, you can actually bring up your extended HUD to get a full readout of what it actually does. We'll do a deep dive into what every single gene trait does later on, but this is basically just how you see them and try to understand them. It's interesting to note that wild babies will actually have different gene traits to their parents. As you can see right there, this baby's got health frail, this guy's got mutable melee. So yeah, they're not going to be the exact same as the parent. I should also mention that there's some creatures out in the wild that will not have traits and cannot have traits, and that seems to be raid-style dinos like the Oasisaur and the Titanosaur. They simply just cannot get them in any way, shape, or form. Maybe there's some sort of admin way of actually putting them on, but naturally, absolutely impossible. So now that we know how to actually see what gene traits creatures have, how do you get them? Well, you can't get any gene traits off of a wild creature. It just doesn't work. You have to first tame that creature. So once you have that creature tamed, you'll be able to go up to it, stab it with your gene scanner, and go to this option right here, which is going to allow you to see what trait it has, and you can either go ahead and delete that trait off of the creature completely, or remove it and put it into your gene scanner. After this, the creature does not have any traits, because that is a permanent change. You cannot put traits back onto a creature if it's already fully grown up. Now, obviously, there's a lot of different ways to tame creatures, and some ways call for you to actually steal an egg. So here we go. We got a rock drake egg. We're going to go ahead and claim it. You can see it does have a trait, and once we have this, we can basically pull that off of this rock drake. If it wasn't a good level, or if it doesn't have one that you don't like, then you can go ahead and just pull it straight off. Any creatures that you tamed before the brand new update that added traits do not have any traits, nor do wild creatures that existed before the patch. But this isn't going to matter very long, because you could just do a dino wipe, or if new creatures are spawning, they will have traits from now on, no matter what map you're on. So once you have a bunch of traits, you can actually store them inside of your gene storage, which is another thing that you can make, and this can store up to 200 in it, whereas the scanner can only hold 10 at a single time. Storing these is as simple as just transferring them over, although the menu is kind of laggy right now. I'm hoping that they'll fix that. And it's also worth mentioning that if your gene storage actually gets destroyed, you will be able to take the traits out of the bag, but obviously you got to do it before it decomposes. Another thing I want to mention is that there's actually 3 different tiers of traits out in the wild. You can find tier 1, which is going to be the most common. Tier 2 is going to be a little bit less common, and then tier 3 I would consider to be quite rare. I've only found a couple of them out in the wild. Your way of actually telling what tier you have is that little number right beside the trait. If that says 1, it's a tier 1, tier 2 is 2, and then tier 3 is 3. So I guess the real question is, what is the difference between a tier 1, a tier 2, and a tier 3? Well, with every single trait, it seems to be a 50% increase from tier 1 to tier 2, and then an additional 50% after that up to tier 3. So basically, a tier 3 is going to be twice as good as a tier 1, and then tier 2 is going to be like right in the middle there. So essentially, it's just like an upgraded version of that trait. So now that you have a bunch of traits, what can you do with them? Well, you can add them into creatures, but not into grown-up creatures. Yeah, it's not possible. They've got to be a baby, so you've got to do some breeding, or maybe even tame a wild baby. It's very important to mention that you can't actually take traits from one creature and add them into a different species. So, for example, I have the Sarco one. It's not going to allow me to put that into the Gigantopithecus, because it's not a Sarco. It's going to work the exact same for every other creature. So adding in your traits is as simple as just simply transferring them from the scanner into the creature, and you can have a max of 5 total traits in a creature, but you can have a max of 3 of a single type of trait. Some of them, though, on the other hand, you can only actually have 1 of, and some you can only have 2 of. We'll go over all of that later on. I've got everything laid out so you can see exactly the limit on each of these traits. So we can go ahead and just add a bunch of these traits onto this guy, and now you can see we've got the limit of 5, and you can see them there on the side as well, along with their tiers. And obviously now we're just gonna have to wait for this guy to be fully grown up, and then we can start using him and all of his extra abilities. So let's go on to some common questions before we get into the full list of traits, and that is that you cannot actually breed traits down into babies. As you can see, these parents have 2 different traits, and the baby does not come out with any traits whatsoever. Now, it would be possible for us to go ahead and just start removing these traits and adding them onto that baby, so technically it is possible to pass them down, but you will lose the trait on the original creature if you do that. So that's going to be the only way to get your new babies with new traits. They're kind of like collectible items. You only get 1 of them from each creature, and there's no way of actually duplicating them. And you may have already guessed it, but if you clone a creature, the clone will not retain any of the traits that the original actually had. So let's say that you've made yourself a couple really nice creatures using all of the traits that you're getting, and something very unfortunate happens, and that creature happens to perish. Well, you are in luck if the body's still there. You're going to be able to actually pull the traits off of a body. So you can simply just remove all of these because obviously they're going to spoil with the body. But let's say the creature got eaten and all you're left with is a little bag. Well, unfortunately, you can't pull traits out of the bag. But there is something inside of here that you can use to get your traits back, and that is the soul of the creature. You can actually resurrect your creatures using the Oasis Ore currently, and they will come back with the original traits that that creature actually had, which is going to be a kind of a really cheeky way of getting all your stuff back, but I mean, it's in the game, so yeah, why not? You can use the gene scanner to also look at enemy dinos and see exactly what traits they actually have, and you can even take the traits out of their bodies as well. And yes, you can steal from their gene storage if you do destroy it. You can hold down R with the scanner and bring up this extended menu, and then you can go ahead and search whatever dino name that you want, and it will basically try to direct you to the closest one. In this case, we had a Spino right behind me. Okay, so let's finally get down to what each and every single one of these brand new traits actually does. And it's also important to mention, these are the current traits as of September 2024. This easily could be expanded in the future, and I'll probably try to follow up that stuff with some information about those brand new traits. So I have sectioned off quite a lot of these guys into like their own little categories, I suppose. And one thing to mention here is that if you see multiple traits on a creature, let's say you see 1 or 2 or 3, that means that you can only have that amount on that creature. So you'll see some of them here where we have rows of 3, and that means that these ones right here can only have 1 of that specific type. So figured I should mention that before we get into all the nitty-gritty details of every single one of these traits. So the first type of traits that we're going to be looking at is the breeding traits, and there are 3 different categories and 6 different types in each of these categories. So right here we're going to be starting out with the mutable trait. This right here is actually going to increase your odds of getting mutations. So you can see even at just tier 1 we have a plus 1% chance of the offspring to be mutated, and then because this is a mutable health, that means that we have an extra chance for that mutation to land on its health stat. So this right here kind of changes the game a little bit. As you can see, tier 2 goes up by 50%, and then tier 3 goes up by a further 50% on top of that. So with a max of like 2%, that's kind of insane. And obviously this goes for each type of stats. So we have stamina, we have oxygen, food, weight, melee. All of these stats have a mutable version and have up to 3 tiers on it. All of the percentages are the exact same. And right here, I've got probably your best odds of getting a health mutation. This guy right here has got level 3 mutable health, and that means that there is a plus 6% chance of the baby being mutated on top of the regular odds that you already actually have, and then a pretty significant chance that it's going to land on health. So yeah, that's basically right here. This is like your perfect way to mutate health on specific creatures. The next lot that we have is the robust lot, and like I've said, you know, health stamina, weight, all those ones. We have one for each of them, but right here we've got the health one, and the robust basically goes ahead and adds a plus 1.5% chance for the offspring to inherit the higher of the health stat in this case. And obviously the percentages scale up when you go through those levels. But just to explain this properly, so let's say I was to breed this one right here with this one right here. So the health on the other one was like 2560. The health on this one is 3000, and obviously I want that health. It doesn't matter that this trait isn't on that one, it's still going to pull the highest out of the two of them. So that's basically how the robust category works. And then right here we have frail, which is kind of the exact opposite. So in this case we have a -% chance to inherit the higher stats. So let's say I went ahead and bred this one who's got 31, 36 with this one over here. We would more than likely get this one, depending on how many of these robust or how many of these frail traits we actually have on the creature. So this one may not seem that useful to a lot of people, but it actually could be in the long run. If you're trying to avoid level cap on official, you don't really want a bunch of stat points into a bunch of stats that you're not going to be using, so more than likely you're going to be trying to breed in lower creature stats into those different stats. Like let's say oxygen, you don't need that on your boss Rexes or your boss Gigas. You know, you definitely would want the lower of those two. But yeah, so may not seem that useful, but it definitely could be. So I wanted to show some of the capabilities of combining some of these traits, and right here I basically made the perfect monkey to go ahead and actually mutate and stack up health mutations. So obviously we've got the 3 mutable 3s, and yeah, that's a plus 6% chance to get the mutations, an extra chance to get it on a health stat. But in addition to that, we can also add in 2 of these health robust 3s, and that's going to add a plus 3% chance from each of them. So essentially what we have right here is pretty much the perfect creature to be stacking health mutations specifically. Now obviously you cannot add the all of these different traits to a bajillion different females and everything, so your best bet is to add them onto the male that you're using to mutate with, and then when you get that health mutation, move them off of the male and then move them onto the baby that is more than likely a male. If you're doing things correctly and you know what you're doing, you're probably using males specifically, and a massive lot of females for the breeding. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that you probably should be doing that. That would be a really fast way of stacking up all your mutations. So our next little category is a pretty exciting one. This is the bearing category, and it affects weight stats. So basically, at tier 1, you're getting a 15% decrease in the weight of certain materials depending on what bearing you have. This one is cave bearing. It's basically the aberration version of this reduction, and for this we get red gems, green gems, blue gems, congealed gas balls, and element ore, all reduced a tier 1 by 15%, a tier 2 by 22.5%, and then a tier 3 a whopping 30%. I'll show you later, you can have 3 tier 3s on a single creature, reducing everything down by 90%. But yeah, let's go through some of the other ones here. So we have desert bearing, which is a lot of scorched earth resources. So we got silk, raw salt, sand, cactus sap, and sulfur. And obviously there's 3 tiers of that. I just didn't put them all on. We've got carcass bearing, which is going to target things that come out of animals, such as chitin, hide, keratin. We've got organic polymer, wool, and pelt. And then we have exotic bearing. Not a crazy useful one for a lot of these resources, but we have angler gel, black pearls, which is super heavy, so it's useful for that. Elements, not that heavy. Leech blood, not really that heavy. Oil weighs a little bit, and then silica pearls, not really heavy at all. So I wouldn't really say this is a super useful one unless you're collecting a lot of black pearls, in which case I probably would try to get a couple tier 3s on this guy. Next up we have plant bearing, which is thatch, wood, fibers, all types of berries, crops, and seeds. And as you can see right in here, it actually affects all types of wood as well. So we got fungal wood reduced down from 50 to 42.5. So yeah, and that's simply just at tier 1 as well. You can, again, you could go up and you could manage to make a stack of wood weigh 5 by having 3 tier 3s on here. That would be ridiculous. So next up we have meat bearing, and these resources don't really weigh that much in the long run, but I guess it can't hurt to have a category for this too. But this is going to target raw meat, fish, mutton, prime meat, and prime fish meat. So yes, moving on to the most exciting one in my opinion, mineral bearing. This is going to reduce the weight of flint, stone, crystal, obsidian, and metal ore. So just at tier 1, a stack of 300 metal, which normally weighs 300, is going to get reduced down by 45 points of weight down to 255. But I've taken this a step further. Right over here, let me grab the metal actually. So right here, this Gigantopithecus has 3 tier 3 mineral bearing, and if we drop in a full stack of 300 metal, it's gonna weigh 30. So that's a 90% reduction. That's ridiculous. Yeah, that's honestly insane for a creature that, you know, you wouldn't be using these guys to collect metal, but the possibility of being able to carry around 10 times the amount of metal is kind of ridiculous. But I've taken this a step further because you know me, I like to go with the full measure. So right here we have an Anki that has no sort of mineral bearing. So normally the weight of 300 metal inside of an Anki goes all the way down to 45. And if we drop that into a tier 3 mineral bearing Anki, that goes down to 4.5. Yes, you're reading that right. That is a silly amount of metal that you could carry on a single Anki. I feel like you would slot cap your Anki before you would fill up its weight. So yeah, one thing to note is with the mineral bearing and on all the bearing categories, on small creatures they start out at 15%, but I have noticed that some larger creatures actually have different percentages, and I'm pretty sure that this only goes for the bearing category, so you don't have to worry about all the other different types of traits. But for the bearing category, it seems like when you get up to around 300 on the drag weight of a creature, which kind of determines what those creatures can do, and they usually scale with size, you get all the way down to 10% instead of your 15%, maxing out at 20%. But then if you go to like some larger creatures, let's say a Diplo, you can see it drops all the way down to 5%, maxing out at 10%. And I'm pretty sure that is the limit, because even on a Giga, which has one of the highest drag weights in the game, it still is capped down to 5%. It's not going to go any lower than that, currently at least. So I figured I'd just mention that. Obviously, you'll have to kind of take a little look at the creature. I'm not going to make a full list of every single creature that is part of these categories, but just for reference, the drag weight of a Deinosuchus is twice the amount of a Gigantopithecus. So I think things like Argies and stuff, you should probably be fine. You should be getting that 15% reduction. But obviously, when you get a little bit bigger like this, they do seem to drop down by a significant amount. But then again, what kind of madman's doing a metal run with a Giga? So the next category we're moving on to is some of the health-based traits. And we're starting out here with Numb, which is a single stack. And basically, this is going to reduce the amount of damage that you're taking by 25%. But then you will take that damage over the next 5 seconds. So basically 5% per 1 second. Now this does scale up with the tier levels, so that's right there is tier 2, and then tier 3 goes all the way up to 50%. Personally, I don't really know what the point of this one would necessarily be. I guess it stops the damage from coming all in at once, but you're still going to take that damage in the long run anyway, but I guess it can't hurt to just have this one. Next up, we have a very exciting one. This is Vampiric, and this is going to heal 5% of the damage you dealt at tier 1, and then it's 7.5% at tier 2, and then all the way up to 10% at tier 3. So let's just say you have a creature that's dealing 500 damage. That means every single time you deal 500 damage, you'll be healing back 50 health. May not sound that great, but put that onto a Giga, and yeah, you've got an absolute menace that would be really, really hard to kill. So next up, we have Tenacious, and this is going to reduce the amount of damage that you're taking as you get lower in health. So it actually starts out at 0% and scales all the way up to 12.5% at tier 1, and then obviously you can see tier 2 and tier 3 right there. But this is only going to take effect when your creature gets from 50% all the way down to 25% of its health. So could be quite a useful one, in my opinion. You can pop this onto a boss dino, and yeah, as it gets more and more hurt, it takes less and less damage, and it's going to take a lot longer to kill a creature like that. We have another similar one, which is Angry, and interestingly enough, you can only stack 2 of these onto a single creature. So Angry is basically the exact same thing, except you're dealing more damage when your health gets lower. These two could definitely work together, because you could stack 3 Tenacious, and then for the other 2 slots, put 2 Angry. And as you can see right here, here's tier 3. It goes all the way up to 25% damage. Next up, we have Protective, and this is going to stack up to 2, and it's going to basically reduce the amount of damage that the rider is taking by 15% to begin with. And it's also going to persist 10 seconds after you dismount. So let's see. Dismount right there, and as you can see, I've got a nice little thing right down there beside my hotbar showing me for the next 10 seconds that I am slightly protected. Now if we look at tier 3, it goes all the way up to 30%, which again is ridiculous. You could technically have 2 of these on your guy, and you're going to be taking 60% less damage for 10 seconds when you hop off of your creature. Yeah, ridiculous. Next up, we have two that kind of go hand in hand. So we have Warm, which is going to add 40 hypothermic insulation to you, which is going to protect you from the cold. And then it's also going to reduce the amount of damage from cold-based attacks by 5%, scaling all the way up to 10%. And yeah, that's definitely quite useful. I would assume like a Managarmer's Breath counts as a cold-based attack, so something like that could be very, very useful. And then on the other side of the coin, we have Cold, which is basically the exact same thing, except it works for heat-based attacks. So it gives you hypothermic insulation, which protects you from the heat, and it also protects you from those heat-based attacks. I don't exactly know if that would count as like fire-based attacks from a dragon, or if it's just heat-based attacks, let's say like a Magmasaur heating up, because that surely would burn everything around it. I guess more testing needs to go into this guy right here, but if that is fire-based attacks, that would be very interesting. Next up, we have the stamina category, and we're starting out here with high endurance, which is going to decrease your stamina drain by 4%, scaling up to 8% at tier 3. And next to that, we have Nocturnal, which is going to reduce your stamina consumption at nighttime by 2.5%, scaling up to 5%. So something like this could be quite useful on, let's say, Megalosaurus or something like that. Yeah, I don't really know very many people that specifically go out at nighttime and try to do things. Most people kind of just stay in our bases. But on the other side of that, we have the exact same thing, except it works for daytime. So scaling from 2.5% all the way up to 5%. This could be useful on pretty much any dino, in my opinion, but stamina is not really going to be a crazy big concern for a lot of people. So we're into the melee category now, and we're starting out here with Excitable, which stacks one time, and it's basically going to reduce the cooldown of your other abilities when you use basic attacks, starting out at 0.25 seconds, scaling up all the way up to 0.5 seconds. So basically, this could be a really useful one to have on pretty much any creature that you're using, because when you're attacking things, obviously your other abilities like your, cooldown attacks and everything like that will come along a lot faster. So yeah, it could be very useful for boss fights specifically. Next up, we have Distracting, and this is a really interesting one in my opinion for boss fights, because if you deal damage with this creature to another creature, that creature is going to deal 5% less damage to all of your other creatures for 20%. So here's the scenario. Put this onto your boss Eternus, run in occasionally and bite the boss, and it's going to be dealing 5% less damage to your creatures for 20 seconds, which scales all the way up to 10% less. So yeah, definitely one that you're going to want on a creature that's not going to be in the battle all the time, but will occasionally take bites. These next two kind of go hand in hand, but we're starting out here with Heavy Hitting. This is going to increase the damage from your basic attacks by 2.5%, but it will decrease the speed of your attacks by 5%. So basically, you're hitting harder, but slower, and that scales all the way up to 5% and 10%. And then right here, we have Quick Hitting, which is the exact opposite of that. So you're going to be hitting a lot faster, but a little bit weaker every time. I think both of these could be quite useful. In my opinion, something maybe like using this one on a creature that has a very fast attack speed anyway would mean that you're attacking so fast, regardless, it doesn't really matter that you're dealing slightly less damage. Our next two are slightly similar as well, but this is Giant Slaying. It stacks up to 2 times, and it's going to decrease the amount of damage that you're dealing to creatures that are of a small variety by 7.5%, but it will increase the amount of damage that you're dealing to creatures of a large variety by 2.5%. So pretty much works on any boss, and anything in the middle between 200 and 500 drag weight should probably get normal damage dealt to it. And right here we have tier 3, and as you can see, it's a pretty significant debuff to small creatures, but it doesn't really matter. Small creatures don't usually have that much health anyway. And here's the other side of the coin, which interestingly enough can actually stack up to 3 times. This is King Slaying, and it's going to increase the amount of damage that you're dealing to bosses and alphas by 5% at minimum, scaling up to 10%. And then it's also actually going to reduce the damage that you're dealing to all other creatures, including that boss's minions as well, by the way, by 10%. But interestingly with this one is the 10% doesn't increase as we go along to tier 3. So that might be a bug that might get changed in the future. I'm not exactly sure. But yeah, you can stack this one up to 3 times. So here's the scenario. You get 3 King Slaying 3 onto one of your boss dinos. It's going to be dealing 30% more damage to that boss. That's game winning. Like, that's just GG's. Next up, we're into the food category, and we're starting out with this fatty right here, and this trait is going to actually give you extra armor per point that you've pumped into its food stats. So just for example, we can see right here, this is the exact armor. I've already actually pumped a couple points in just to see it. And it's going to increase because I have all 3 of them on here. It's going to increase by 0.45. But yeah, you can see every single time that I pump a point in, that's going to go up. Now, that may not seem that useful to you, but imagine you put that onto your Daedon that you're bringing into boss fights. You're already pumping food into that creature, and it just means it's going to have crazy high natural armor just by having these traits. Then we also have slow metabolism, which is going to reduce the food consumption by 5%, scaling up to 10%. And it's also actually going to be included with your powered abilities that use food. So again, a Daedon. Your perfect Daedon would probably have 3 fatties and then 2 of the slow metabolism. So yeah, that definitely would be a ridiculously good Daedon to have for your boss fights. Next up, we have a couple that kind of relate to swimming, and the first one is aquatic. It's going to increase your swim speed by 7.5%, scaling up to 15%. It's going to reduce your oxygen consumption when you are underwater by 12.5%, scaling up to 25%. And then the last one is it's going to reduce your stamina drain when you're sprinting underwater by 4%, scaling up to 8%. Could be quite useful. The next one is athletic, which is pretty similar, and having this active is going to gain you a slight health regen and stamina regen for every point into oxygen, and it scales pretty good, to be honest. So basically, if you have a bunch of points into oxygen, your creature, let's just go ahead and just make it so it starts healing. So this is what it's kind of at currently. You can see how fast that's healing. Let's pump the rest of these levels into oxygen. Now it should be healing slightly faster. Could be quite useful. I feel like there's probably better abilities out there, but definitely could be useful. So we're into the movement speed category, and we're starting out here with Careful, which stacks 1 time, and using this, you'll gain a 7.5% movement speed buff that is lost after 20 seconds after you either deal, receive damage, or if you hop onto the creature. Let's just check out the other tier. So that's tier 2, here's tier 3. You hop on and you get this little timer up in the top right there, and once that 20 seconds goes down, I will be 15% faster than I am currently. It might be kind of hard to demonstrate this one properly, but maybe eagle-eyed viewers will be able to tell that there is a slight difference now of 15%. I mean, could be quite useful for a creature that you like to get around the map on. If you're not engaging in combat, then you should be pretty good to go and you'll be fast all the time. But again, this one does reset every single time that you hop off, take damage, or receive damage. So you can see it's back on there. So after 20 seconds, it should be fast again. So these next two also go hand in hand. We have Aggressive, which stacks twice. And this is whenever your creature deals damage to a non-allied target, you gain a 2.5% movement speed buff for 5 seconds. And every single time you hit, this timer continues to refresh itself. So basically, as long as you're constantly hitting a creature, you should have that slight increase in the movement speed. So it starts at 2.5% and scales all the way up to 5%. And then our next one here is Cowardly, and that is going to stack up to 3 times on a single creature, and it's when you receive the damage, you're going to get that movement speed buff, and it scales the exact same way. Don't worry, we're almost at the end here. We have Fast Learner, which affects the experience gain, and at tier 1, you're going to be getting a plus 15% experience gain, up to 30% at tier 3. Now, the second line in it kind of confuses me. It says this trait can be replaced even after the creature has reached maturity. I'm not exactly certain what that means. I thought maybe it meant that you could take the trait and add it onto a fully grown creature, but I've tried that and it doesn't work, so I'm not really sure. Maybe there's more to it. And last, but definitely not least, we have Frenetic, which is going to increase your Torpor drain by 7.5%, scaling all the way up to 15% at tier 3. And yeah, that basically could be kind of useful if you're fighting a lot of snakes and stuff that deals Torpor damage. Could be kind of awful if it's on a wild Giga, though, because that means that it would drain its Torpor a lot faster and you would have to probably watch it. So yeah, actually that could be kind of awful if it is on a Giga. Anyway, that is all of the traits that are currently in the game. It took a lot of work to get all these categorized and make sure that I had every single one of them. And yeah, guys, that is the video. Hopefully you know more about traits than before you started this one. If you did enjoy this one, do me a favor, drop a like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And yeah, hope this helped. Catch you in the next one.